I still remember the morning like it happened yesterday. The sun had barely crept through the curtains, painting our bedroom in a soft golden hue, but I was wide awake, my heart hammering against my chest in a rhythm I couldn't control. Today was not just any day, it was the day my curiosity, my secret longing, and my fear were all going to collide, and I had no idea if I was ready for what would come next. I had always kept my fascination hidden, buried under layers of denial and fear. I loved my wife dearly, but there had been a part of me, a part so secret, that even she didn't know it existed. I had watched her wedding videos countless times, memorized the curve of her neckline, the shimmer of her gown, the way her veil framed her face. And now, that quiet obsession had become an impossible, irresistible temptation. The bridal dress sat on the chair across from me, delicate and shimmering in the morning light. I had never intended for her to know, never intended to cross this line. But here I was, alone, trembling with anticipation. My hands hovered over the fabric, soft and almost alive under my fingers. Every stitch seemed to whisper to me, every fold beckoning me closer. I had imagined this moment more times than I could count, and yet nothing could have prepared me for the reality, the scent of the fabric, the weight of the gown, the way it felt when I lifted it gently from its hanger. My pulse quickened, a mix of fear, guilt, and excitement swirling inside me. I slipped into the gown cautiously, almost ceremoniously. My body shivered as the satin brushed against my skin, the corset pressing tightly around my torso, the skirt flowing down over my legs in a cascade of white silk. It was heavier than I imagined, yet somehow, it felt right. My reflection in the mirror across the room stopped me cold. The man staring back at me was still me, yet not. The gown transformed me, softened the edges I had always considered permanent, and for the first time in my life, I felt fragile and beautiful, a sensation so foreign it made me dizzy. I couldn't speak, couldn't move. I simply stared, caught between wonder and fear, completely unprepared for the consequences of what I was about to do. And then I heard the soft click of the bedroom door. My stomach dropped into my shoes, my hands freezing on the delicate lace. "Honey." Her voice, curious and unsuspecting, pierced the room, and my heart skipped a beat. Panic flooded me. I had imagined her reaction 1,000 ways, each worse than the last. I couldn't breathe. I wanted to vanish, to turn back time, to pretend none of this had ever happened, but it was too late. She was there, just beyond the doorway, and she saw me. For a moment, there was silence. A long, stretched silence that felt like an eternity. Her eyes widened in shock, scanning the gown, then me, then back to the gown. I wanted to explain, to apologize, but no words came out. I was frozen, trapped in the most vulnerable moment of my life, my deepest secret exposed, my heart laid bare. And then, something unexpected happened. She didn't scream. She didn't yell. She didn't run. She simply stood there, frozen, staring, and finally, whispered, "Is this really you?" The relief and terror collided in my chest. I nodded, unable to speak. Her steps were slow, cautious, but deliberate as she approached. Every step seemed to echo in my skull. She stopped beside me, reaching out to touch the fabric, as if she were trying to understand what had drawn me here, what had made me do this. Her fingers traced the lace delicately, almost reverently, and I felt my breath hitch. "I never knew," she said softly, voice trembling, a mixture of awe, confusion, and something else I couldn't name. I wanted to explain, wanted to confess, but the words seemed inadequate for the storm of feelings inside me. Instead, I simply let her touch me, let her presence calm the panic that had threatened to swallow me whole. And then she did something that would change everything. She smiled, not the casual, everyday smile, but a smile that was patient, understanding, and somehow daring me to accept myself. "You look beautiful," she said. I couldn't tell if she was joking, teasing, or sincere, and the ambiguity cut deeper than any insult ever could. But the sincerity in her eyes told me that she wasn't mocking me. She was seeing me. Truly seeing me, in a way I had never allowed anyone to. We stood there, silent, connected by the weight of the moment. My hands clutched the fabric nervously, unsure if I should retreat or embrace what had been revealed. Her hand rested lightly on my arm, grounding me, and for the first time, I felt a flicker of courage. Maybe this wasn't the end of the world. Maybe it was the beginning of something I had been too afraid to imagine. And then the questions came. How long had I felt this way? Why hadn't I told her before? What did this mean for us, for our marriage, for me? I opened my mouth to answer, but the words tangled, betraying the whirlwind of emotions inside me. She waited patiently, eyes searching mine for honesty, for truth, for a glimpse of the man I had hidden so well. I took a shaky breath, feeling the weight of my confession pressing down on me. I've always wondered, I began, voice barely audible, what it would be like to be like this. To feel beautiful like this. Her gaze softened, and she didn't interrupt, letting me spill my heart, letting me show the part of myself I had kept locked away for years. The hours that followed were a blur of tears, laughter, and whispered confessions. We talked about identity, about desire, about fear, and about love. She didn't judge me, didn't turn away. Instead, she asked questions, listened, and held me as I trembled with emotions I had never allowed myself to feel. The room seemed to shrink, the world outside fading, until there was only us, only the gown, only the truth laid bare in the morning light. By the end of the day, I had learned something fundamental about courage, not the kind that demands loud declarations or heroic acts, but the quiet, trembling courage of showing yourself to someone who matters, of risking rejection to embrace authenticity. She had found me, yes, but she had also found a way to help me find myself. And in that moment, I realized that the gown was never just fabric, it was a mirror, reflecting a part of me I had denied, a part one could no longer ignore. We didn't have all the answers that day. We didn't know what the future held, or how our relationship would evolve. But we had something far more important: honesty, understanding, and the fragile, exhilarating start of acceptance. And as I stood there, draped in her bridal gown, tears running down my cheeks, I understood that the world hadn't ended. It had begun anew, and for the first time in my life, I felt fully, undeniably seen. The next few days were surreal, like I had stepped into a parallel version of my life that had always existed just out of reach. I tried to act normal, to go about my routines, but every glance in the mirror reminded me of what had happened, what had been revealed, and what I could no longer hide. The bridal gown had been carefully folded and placed back in the wardrobe, but it lingered in my mind like a ghost, a reminder of the part of me I had awakened, a part that had always wanted to exist but never dared. My wife, meanwhile, treated me differently, though I couldn't quite put my finger on how. There was an unspoken understanding between us now, a fragile thread connecting our worlds that hadn't been there before. She didn't ask about the gown every day, didn't force me to talk about it, but she looked at me differently. There was curiosity in her eyes, patience, and, most importantly, acceptance. The way she smiled, the way she lingered just a moment longer in my presence, made me feel seen in a way I had never experienced before. One evening, a few days after that fateful morning, she returned home from work holding something behind her back. Her eyes sparkled with mischief, a dangerous glint that made my heart skip a beat. "I thought you might like this," she said, revealing a smaller, simpler gown, less formal, more delicate, but undeniably feminine. My stomach lurched. I hadn't expected this. I had feared judgment, perhaps even ridicule, yet here she was, offering me not just permission, but encouragement. I didn't know how to respond. Part of me wanted to run, to hide, to pretend I had never touched her bridal gown, never explored this side of myself. But another part, an urgent, desperate part, longed to try it, to feel the fabric against my skin, to embrace the forbidden thrill that had consumed me before. My hands trembled as I reached out, lifting the gown from her hands. It was soft, silky, and lighter than the bridal gown, almost like it was made to fit me, to mold to this new version of myself that I had barely begun to understand. "Do you want me to?" she asked, her voice gentle but teasing. I nodded before I could think, and she guided me to the bedroom with an ease that made my pulse race. She didn't look judgmental, didn't seem shocked or scared. Instead, she seemed intrigued, like she wanted to see who I was beneath the surface, like she wanted to witness my transformation firsthand. I slipped into the gown with her watching, every movement deliberate, cautious, and electric. The moment the fabric settled around my shoulders, I felt an unfamiliar confidence, a strange exhilaration coursing through me. I twirled in front of the mirror, watching the gown sway around my legs, feeling the weight of her eyes on me, the warmth of her presence, and a surge of pride I hadn't known I could feel. "You look amazing," she whispered, and I could hear the sincerity in her voice, the lack of mockery, the complete acceptance. It hit me with an intensity one wasn't prepared for. She wasn't just seeing me, she was celebrating me. That night, we talked for hours. I confessed every fear, every longing, every secret moment I had ever had imagining this life. She listened, never interrupting, never judging, her eyes wide with empathy and curiosity. The conversation was raw, vulnerable, and terrifying. I had spent years hiding, pretending, and denying myself, and now, with her, the walls I had built around my identity were crumbling. For the first time, I could speak freely, could admit who I truly was without fear of rejection. It wasn't all easy. There were moments when doubt crept in, when I wondered if I was crossing a line too far, if this curiosity was selfish, if I would ruin the marriage I cherished. But her presence grounded me. She never forced me, never pushed me, yet she gave me the freedom to explore, to experiment, to embrace this side of myself with courage. Days turned into weeks, and the secret transformed from a source of fear into a ritual of connection. Some evenings, she would leave me alone to dress in the gowns, letting me savor the experience privately, while other times, she would sit nearby, knitting or reading, content to witness my quiet transformation. Slowly, I began to understand the gravity of what had been unleashed within me, not just a fascination, but a yearning, an identity that had always existed beneath the surface. The changes weren't just emotional, they were psychological, altering the way I moved, spoke, and even thought. I caught myself observing my reflection differently, noting subtle curves, the way fabric clung, the way posture shifted instinctively. I realized I was learning to inhabit this body in a new way, to accept the fluidity of identity, to embrace the beauty in vulnerability. And each time I looked at her unwavering support, I felt the bond between us deepen, solidify, and become more profound than I had ever imagined. But with each step forward came anxiety. I worried about the world outside, about friends, family, the judgment I imagined would rain down if anyone discovered this side of me. What if this curiosity, this identity, this transformation became a scandal, a source of shame? Those thoughts gnawed at me, threatening to undo the progress I had made. Yet when I looked at her, I felt courage again. She had seen me, all of me, and had chosen love over judgment. If she could accept me, maybe the world could too. One evening, while she was at work, I found myself drawn to the bridal gown again. The memory of that morning, of her discovering me, of her patience and acceptance, overwhelmed me. I carefully lifted the gown from its hanger, running my hands over the delicate fabric, feeling the familiar thrill pulse through me. The gown seemed heavier this time, not in weight, but in significance. It was no longer just a curiosity or a secret indulgence, it was a symbol of who I was becoming, and the courage it had taken to reveal that self to someone I loved. I dressed slowly, savoring each moment, each sensation, each brush of satin against my skin. And as I stood before the mirror, fully adorned, fully exposed, I realized something terrifying and liberating. I didn't want to hide anymore. I wanted to explore, to embrace, to live fully in this identity I had so long denied. And I knew, with a certainty that both thrilled and terrified me, that I couldn't do it alone. She had to be part of this journey, just as I had become part of hers in ways neither of us had anticipated. When she returned that night, I was still in the gown. She stopped in the doorway, her eyes wide, and I felt a rush of vulnerability unlike anything I had ever known. "You're still doing it," she said softly, and I nodded. She stepped closer, examining me, her fingers brushing lightly over the fabric. "I can see how much this means to you," she whispered, and the words struck me like a revelation. She understood, she truly understood, and in that understanding, I felt a release I hadn't known was possible. The nights that followed became a delicate dance of exploration, confession, and acceptance. I learned to navigate my fears, to articulate my feelings, and to honor my identity while respecting the boundaries of our life together. She became both witness and guide, her patience and insight helping me embrace the complexity of who I was. And yet, the transformation wasn't just external. It reshaped my perception of myself. of love, of courage. I began to see beauty in vulnerability, strength in softness, and authenticity in confession. The gowns, once symbols of forbidden desire, had become mirrors, reflecting the courage it took to live honestly, the love it took to accept oneself fully, and the bond it took to share that truth with another human being. By the end of the second week, I understood that the path ahead would not be simple, would not be free from fear, doubt, or judgment. But I also knew that I had tasted something profound, the liberation of authenticity, the thrill of self-acceptance, and the unparalleled intimacy of revealing one's true self to the person who matters most. And as I lay in bed that night, still wrapped in the memory of satin and lace, I realized that my life had irrevocably changed, not because of the gown itself, but because of the courage it had demanded, and the love it had revealed. Weeks turned into a month, and by now, what had started as a private, trembling curiosity had become a part of my daily existence. The gowns were no longer hidden experiments, they were extensions of my identity, whispers of a self I had been too afraid to know. Some days, I would wear them alone, savoring the privacy, letting the silky fabric mold to me, teaching me patience, grace, and a strange, new rhythm of movement. Other days, my wife would be there, sitting nearby, reading or sipping tea, giving me her quiet approval, her presence a steady anchor in a world that had suddenly grown wide and uncertain. It wasn't always easy. Fear lingered at the edges, subtle but persistent. I worried about the people outside our door, about the judgment I imagined lurking in every glance, every casual conversation I might overhear. I feared the inevitable questions. What was this? Why was I doing it? Was it a sign of weakness, of deceit, of confusion? But each time doubt crept in, I remembered her eyes, the way she had looked at me the first morning, the way she had whispered, "You look beautiful," and the courage inside me swelled. That courage was no longer tentative, it was steady, growing with each day I embraced myself. One evening, she returned from work with an unfamiliar excitement. She didn't speak immediately, just held a small package, a mischievous glint in her eyes that both thrilled and unnerved me. "I thought it might be fun to try something new," she said softly, revealing a simpler but equally feminine outfit, something less formal than the bridal gown but equally transformative. My pulse quickened. I had learned in the past month that my fascination wasn't merely about clothing, it was about identity, about feeling seen, about exploring a side of myself I had always silenced. I hesitated, unsure if I was ready to go further. But her patience, her unwavering presence, gave me courage. Slowly, deliberately, I let her guide me, helping me slip into the outfit. The fabric brushed against my skin, sending shivers down my spine. And as I adjusted the delicate layers, I noticed something extraordinary. This was no longer just an act of curiosity or secret indulgence. It was a revelation. I was learning to inhabit a new self, one that felt fragile, beautiful, and powerful all at once. She didn't just watch, she participated. Her hands guided mine when I fumbled with a clasp, her voice gentle as she reassured me when I feared I might look foolish. And when I finally stood before the mirror, fully adorned, I didn't see a man in women's clothing, I saw a reflection of authenticity, of courage, of a self I had long denied. My pulse raced, my chest tightened, and a strange exhilaration coursed through me. She reached out, lightly touching my arm, her smile encouraging, her presence unwavering. "You're learning to love yourself," she whispered, and in that simple sentence, I felt a lifetime of shame and fear lift, replaced by something rare, fragile, and exhilarating, acceptance. But with each revelation came new challenges. The world outside our home, though distant, felt more imposing than ever. I began to notice the subtle ways I had been conditioned to hide, to shrink, to minimize myself. Every glance, every posture, every hesitant step reminded me of the years I had spent denying this part of myself. Yet, paradoxically, the gowns, her guidance, and her acceptance were slowly rewriting those patterns. I was learning to inhabit this self with grace, to move without fear, to speak with confidence. One night, alone in the bedroom, I found myself standing before the mirror, the bridal gown once again draped around me. The fabric felt heavier now, not in weight, but in significance. It wasn't just a piece of clothing, it was a symbol, a mirror reflecting courage, longing, and the profound vulnerability of living honestly. I traced the lace along my neckline, feeling the familiar thrill pulse through me. And as I stood there, I realized something terrifying and liberating. I was falling in love with this self, this identity, this version of me that had always existed beneath the surface. When she returned that night, she paused at the doorway, taking in the sight before her. "You've grown more comfortable," she observed softly, and I could see the pride in her eyes. I nodded, words failing me. She stepped closer, her fingers brushing lightly over the gown. "It's beautiful," she said, and for a moment, I wondered if I had ever felt truly beautiful before this. We talked again, late into the night, about boundaries, identity, and the road ahead. She asked questions, probed gently, and I answered with honesty, revealing fears I had never voiced, desires I had long suppressed. The conversation was exhausting, exhilarating, and transformative. We navigated the complexities of my newfound identity together, learning, adjusting, and embracing the uncertainty of what lay ahead. The days that followed were a dance of exploration and revelation. I discovered that wearing the gowns altered not just my appearance, but my perception, my movement, my very sense of self. I became aware of subtleties I had ignored for years, the way fabric draped, the curve of a sleeve, the softness of a hem. I moved differently, spoke differently, even breathed differently. And each time I saw her reaction, her approval, her curiosity, I felt an affirmation that I had never known before. Yet, despite the intimacy and acceptance, the world outside our home remained a looming presence. I feared discovery, ridicule, rejection. Every casual glance from a neighbor, every passing comment from a friend, reminded me of the fragility of this new identity. But within the walls of our home, I discovered freedom, a space where I could explore, express, and embody my authentic self without fear. One particularly quiet evening, as rain tapped softly against the windows, I found myself experimenting with her accessories, delicate earrings, a simple necklace, the way they complemented the gown. She watched, sitting nearby, her gaze steady and encouraging. "You're embracing this so naturally," she remarked, and I felt a surge of pride. I twirled slowly, watching the reflections shift, the fabric sway, the light catch on the embellishments. And for the first time, I understood the profound depth of identity not merely as clothing or appearance, but as essence, as presence, as courage realized in living honestly. By the end of the month, I had transformed not just externally, but internally. I had learned patience, grace, and the courage to embrace vulnerability. I had discovered that authenticity was not a singular moment but a continuous journey, one that demanded honesty, reflection, and the willingness to confront fear. And in that journey, my wife had become both witness and partner, guiding me gently, supporting me unwaveringly, loving me in ways that transcended traditional expectations. Yet, even in this newfound acceptance, I knew there were challenges ahead. The world outside remained unpredictable, judgmental, and at times hostile. I could not control how others would react if they discovered this side of me. But within the sanctuary of our home, with her by my side, I had discovered something more important than approval or recognition. I had discovered self-acceptance, courage, and the fragile, exhilarating freedom of living authentically. As I lay in bed that night, draped in silk and lace, listening to the rain patter softly against the windows, I realized that my life had irrevocably changed. The gowns, once symbols of curiosity and secret indulgence, had become mirrors, reflecting courage, love, and the profound vulnerability of revealing one's true self. And I knew, with a certainty that both terrified and exhilarated me, that I could never return to the person I had been before that morning. I was no longer hiding. I was no longer denying. I was living, fully, authentically, and irrevocably transformed. By now, I had learned to navigate my identity with more confidence than I had ever imagined possible. The gowns, the silky fabrics, the delicate lace, they were no longer just items of curiosity or secret indulgence. They were expressions of who I was, tangible reflections of courage, vulnerability, and authenticity. I moved differently, thought differently, breathed differently. And my wife, patient, observant, and endlessly supportive, had become the anchor I needed, the witness to a transformation that went far deeper than fabric and appearance. But life, as it always does, demanded more. One evening, she suggested something I hadn't anticipated. "I think it's time you saw yourself differently," she said, her voice calm but edged with that gentle insistence I had learned to trust. "Not just here, in private, but fully, in a way you can't ignore." She didn't explain further, but I felt the gravity of her words, the unspoken challenge. My pulse quickened, fear mingling with anticipation. She led me to the living room, where she had set up a small corner with a full-length mirror and a camera she claimed would help me see myself fully. I stood frozen, heart pounding, as she adjusted the lighting, arranged the space, and gestured for me to approach. "This isn't about judgment," she said softly, "it's about reflection. Seeing the truth, not hiding from it." I swallowed, uncertain if I was ready, and yet, when I stepped forward, the reflection that met my eyes made my breath catch. There I was, draped in a gown that flowed over me like water, delicate lace tracing my shoulders, my posture somehow softer yet taller, my expression open, vulnerable, and alive. I had never seen myself like this before, not in photographs, not in the mirror, not in the fleeting glimpses when I dared to imagine. This was a version of me I had denied for decades, and now, under her gentle encouragement, I had no choice but to face it. She handed me the camera. "Record yourself," she instructed. "Tell yourself who you are. Not me, not the world, just you." My hands shook, but I obeyed. I spoke haltingly at first, my voice breaking, sharing the fears, the longing, the hidden dreams I had kept locked away. And as I spoke, I noticed a change, not just in the reflection staring back at me, but in myself. My words carried weight, my identity felt real, my courage solidified. I wasn't just pretending anymore. I was claiming myself. Tears streamed down my face as I finished the recording, and when I looked up at her, I saw something extraordinary: pride, love, and awe. She reached out, taking my hand gently. "You're more beautiful than you've ever allowed yourself to see," she whispered. The words were simple, yet they resonated deeper than anything I had ever heard. For the first time, I believed them. I wasn't just wearing a gown, I was embracing my soul, my identity, my truth. The following days brought new experiences, small but profound. We experimented with hairstyles, accessories, and expressions of femininity that I had only dreamed of before. Each moment was a revelation, a lesson in patience, courage, and self-acceptance. I discovered the joy of movement, the thrill of seeing myself in the mirror, the exhilaration of inhabiting a body that finally felt like mine. She was always there, guiding, observing, supporting, celebrating, not as a teacher, but as a partner, a co-explorer on this journey of transformation. But with joy came fear. I worried about the world outside our home, about friends, family, colleagues. What if they discovered this side of me? What if they judged, ridiculed, rejected me? Some nights, I would lie awake, haunted by imagined whispers and sideways glances. Yet, in those moments, I returned to the memory of her eyes, her hands, her unwavering support. And I realized something essential. Courage wasn't the absence of fear, but the willingness to move forward despite it. And then, one afternoon, she surprised me again. "I want to take you somewhere," she said, her eyes glinting with mischief and purpose. She didn't say more, just guided me to the car. My nerves buzzed, my heart raced. I had learned to trust her, to follow her lead, but the unknown was intoxicating, terrifying, and thrilling all at once. We arrived at a small studio, cozy, sunlit, with a single full-length mirror and minimal furnishings. My stomach knotted. "This is for you," she explained. "A space to explore, to create, to be fully yourself without hesitation." I felt a wave of gratitude, love, and awe. She had taken a leap of faith with me, and now, she had created a sanctuary where my transformation could flourish. Over the next few hours, I experimented with outfits, hairstyles, poses, and expressions. The mirror became a confidant, a witness, a teacher. I twirled, laughed, cried, and marveled at the reflection staring back. I realized how far I had come from a secretive, trembling man afraid of exposure to someone daring enough to embrace identity, authenticity, and vulnerability fully. Each pose, each glance, each movement was a declaration. I existed, I mattered, I was alive in a way I had never known. By the time we returned home, exhaustion and exhilaration mingled in my body. She hugged me, whispered words of encouragement, and smiled with that knowing gleam in her eyes. "You've transformed," she said softly. "Not just outside, but inside too." And she was right. I had grown, stretched, and opened in ways I had never imagined. The gowns, the mirrors, the intimate rituals all had become more than clothing or curiosity. They were tools of courage, mirrors of truth, and conduits of love. The weeks that followed brought a rhythm, a balance between exploration and ordinary life. I discovered confidence I had never known, the joy of expressing myself authentically, and the intimacy of sharing vulnerability with someone who loved me unconditionally. We talked endlessly about boundaries, identity, and self-expression, learning, adjusting, and growing together. I realized that transformation wasn't just about clothing or appearance, it was about self-awareness, courage, and the unshakable bond of love. And then one night, as I stood alone in the mirror, the bridal gown draped around me, I understood something profound. This journey, this transformation, this courage, it wasn't just about me. It was about the marriage we had, the trust we had built, and the willingness to love and accept without condition. The gowns, the reflection, the vulnerability, they were not escapes but revelations. They were mirrors reflecting not just beauty, but strength, love, and authenticity. When she returned that night, I didn't hide. I stood tall, proud, and vulnerable, allowing her to see the culmination of weeks of growth, exploration, and transformation. She smiled, a smile that spoke volumes, filled with pride, love, and awe. "You've become who you were always meant to be," she said softly. And for the first time, I believed it, not because of the gown, not because of the reflection, but because I had claimed myself fully, honestly, and bravely. As I lay in bed that night, the fabric of the bridal gown resting lightly on my shoulders, I felt a serenity I had never known. Fear, doubt, and shame had given way to courage, self-acceptance, and the profound intimacy of shared love. My life had changed irrevocably, not because of the gowns themselves, but because of the journey they had demanded, the courage to reveal myself, the bravery to embrace identity, and the love that had guided me through every trembling step. I had learned that transformation was not a single moment, but a continuum, a journey of self-discovery, courage, and love. And as I drifted to sleep, I knew that the man I had been, fearful and hidden, had given way to someone authentic, seen, and fully alive. The gowns had been a catalyst, my wife a guide, and together, we had discovered the extraordinary power of acceptance, vulnerability, and courage. The next morning, I woke not with fear, but with anticipation. Each day became a new chapter in this ongoing story of transformation, identity, and love. And though the world outside might never fully understand, within the walls of our home, I was free. Free to explore, free to express, free to exist fully as the person I had always been, waiting only for the courage to reveal myself. And I knew, without question, that I would never hide again.